gambling with World War III.
Это нарушает нашу безопасность, расширение НАТО.
A peacekeeping force does not exist with a ceasefire.
Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated.
Any regime attempts that create a security vacuum have been historically catastrophic.
Hello, welcome to the Security Brief. New look, same format, hopefully the same forward-looking analysis. We're going to focus today on the arms race, specifically the advent of hypersonic weapons, weapons that travel at 5 times the speed of sound. They have been with us for some years, but there have been some huge advances of late, so a certain amount of catch-up going on in the West. But a lot of the focus now shifting to defence, space-based interceptors. Are we entering the era of the space wars? We'll get a view on who is developing what from our security correspondent Frank Gardner, and of course here with me in the studio, our resident analyst and former British military strategic planner, Mikey Kay.
Christian, hi.
Do you like the new look?
I'm delighted with it, actually. I'm not sure we've got anywhere to go after here, but it's good.
Let's start with the what. What is a hypersonic weapon?
So you've just articulated it's Mach 5 plus, 5 times the speed of sound, but also the speeds go way higher. There is talk of some evolution of technology in the hypersonic world going beyond Mach 20. Okay, so massively fast missile-based systems. Now, where they differ, Christian, from the intercontinental ballistic missile, which is the furthest range ballistic missile that to date has been designed, is an intercontinental ballistic missile effectively takes a predicted parabolic trajectory, okay? So when it's fired, the warhead will enter into low Earth orbit space, and it'll spend around 20 minutes within that parabolic before it then comes down. What's been evolved in terms of a counter to that is the predictability of the parabolic curve. Now, these are supersonic, so they'll reach speeds of Mach 2 plus. When we come to the hypersonic missile, it's not doing the parabolic. It's doing a speed that is way faster, as we said, in excess of Mach 5, but it has what's called a hypersonic glide system or a hypersonic body. And what that means is that when the warhead separates from the missile, it can then have boosters on it that it doesn't take the parabolic trajectory, and it can basically maneuver in the final phases of flight, which basically means it's really hard to counter and it's really hard to shoot down.
Yeah, and that manoeuvrability is one of the things we're going to focus on. But the reason we're talking about it this week is because it's been in the news. This idea that the US is deploying new weapons, and specifically the Typhoon, to Japan. What is it?
Right, the Typhoon is effectively, in essence, there's a shortage of US land-based medium-range missile interceptor capability or missile capability that can target other targets. That's been seen as a big gap. Now, when it comes to that part of the world, Japan, obviously Taiwan is the huge friction point at the moment. So there's been a gap that has been identified by the US. So what they've done is they've effectively taken 2 missiles, the Tomahawk land attack missile, which is a cruise missile with about 1,000 miles range, and they've taken what's called the SM-6 interceptor. Now, they are traditionally naval-based launched capabilities, which the US have had for a while. But what they've done is they've evolved that, and they've developed a land-based US Army system called the Typhoon, and that basically is what has been deployed by the US to Japan and created a little bit of controversy.
But how does it work?
Okay, so let's take a look. I think we've got a slide here. What you'll see here on this graphic is that's not the missile, that's the launch system and the battery-operated command. So the 4 trucks in the back of that shot and the vertical systems, they're vertical launch systems. You can put a Tomahawk land attack missile on that, which can attack something out to about 1,000 miles, or you can put an SM-6 interceptor in it, which goes at about Mach 3, so it's not hypersonic technically, but it can intercept ballistic missiles. And then that big truck in the front is the battery-operated command.
And why Japan? Why would they put something like this in Japan, and what sort of targets are they looking at?
Well, I think if we go slide, if we look at a map of the area, we can actually see the range rings on the SM-6 and the Tomahawk land attack missile. Now, this has been deployed to Iwakuni. Iwakuni is right next door to Hiroshima, so that's where the dot is on the screen, if you like. The 370-kilometer range ring, that's the SM-6 interceptor. It's got hypersonic up there, but I would kind of disagree with that label at the moment, just because it's only Mach 3. And then the 1,600-kilometer ring, that effectively is the range of any Tomahawk land attack missile that can be launched from that. And then if you look at the geography, you can see North Korea up to the northwest of Iwakuni, and then obviously you've got a significant amount of coastline out to the west, which is China. So obviously creating a little bit of controversy with the Russians and the Chinese.
But presumably it has sparked a reaction. What's been the deployment from China and from Russia in response?
Yeah, diplomatically from China, there's been a lot of pushback. What we'll probably see there is a escalation of military capability that will then be pushed in by China. But Russia has already done that. They've deployed what's called the Bastion K-300 missile system. If you look at Japan, where it says range of US missiles in Japan, just under the far right A, if you go down, that's some Russian islands called Kuril. And what the Russians have done is they put a K-300 missile system. Now, it can't actually reach the Japanese mainland, but it could obviously intercept naval targets or potential Japanese or naval capability that are coming anywhere close.
Let's bring in Frank, because as you say, he's just written a superb piece online for our in-depth series looking at this very issue. And what I take away from it, Frank, when I read your piece, was that there is this global contest ongoing right now, and it's really heating up.
Yeah, China is well ahead of the rest of the pack on this one, closely followed by Russia, leaving the West way behind. Because what's happened, Christian, is that for the majority of this century, the 21st century, the West, primarily the US and the UK, were very much preoccupied with fighting insurgency wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and counterterrorism. China didn't have to worry about that. They were busy developing weapons and increasing their dominance over the South China Sea and threatening Taiwan. And they've been investing very heavily in hypersonic weapons. They've been doing it for the last 20 years. In 2019, they unveiled at a military parade in Beijing their thing called the Dongfeng 17, which is a missile that goes right up into the stratosphere and then launches a hypersonic warhead or several. And they've built on that capability, so they are a long way ahead. Russia has a number of different weapons, like Avangard. Some of the claims by President Putin have been a little bit outlandish, claiming, for example, that the Kinzhal dagger hypersonic missile is unstoppable. It isn't. It's been shot down several times over Ukraine. But China has got both hypersonic glide and hypersonic cruise missiles, which are going to make it very hard if the US decides it's going to defend Taiwan with its navy, should China decide to take Taiwan.
Frank, it's Mikey here. Just a very quick follow-on. The US has Dark Eagle. That's their long-range hypersonic weapon system that is in trial at the moment. That's predicted to be fielded at the end of 2025. Where's the UK on this evolution of hypersonic capability?
Well, in blunt, way, way behind. But they are not doing nothing. So in April this year, the Ministry of Defence in the UK announced that they had successfully completed 233 tests at the NASA Langley Laboratory in Virginia, together with the US government and together with UK industry. And it's a thing called the Defence Science and Technology Laboratories. They've been carrying out propulsion tests. But, OK, great. John Healey, the UK Defence Minister, called it a landmark moment, a historic moment. But we are years behind. It'll be a long time before this stuff becomes operational.
Frank, for the moment, thank you. I know you've been at some of the arms fairs.
So met a fascinating guy called Kevin Moore in the coffee room in the coffee lounge at DSEI. His previous experience is retired lieutenant colonel, US Army, but an expert in missile and missile defence.
OK, well, let's bring him in. Kevin, hello.
Good morning. How are you?
We're very well. We're very well. Maybe you could bring us up to speed with this capability gap that Mikey has been talking about.
Frank touched on it. Why are we behind? We were fighting other wars, and a lot of the S&T dollars that had been given to kind of, years ago, the U.S. and the West were developing, hypersonic capabilities. You look at the space shuttle, there's nothing new there. It's just, we were focused on a different mission set. So fast forward, and as China and Russia have, this newer capability, we're playing a little catch up. And so one thing I wanted to highlight, though, on kind of the defense, right, is the U.S. and the West, we focus on this layered capability, right? So that goes down from, if you think counter UAS and you have Iron Dome, for example, or you have IFPC on the U.S. side, all the way up from a PAC-3 missile to THAAD. You kind of have this layered defense based on what threats coming in. And when you talk about the new hypersonic, you talked about the speed, number one, being a concern, because, going super, super fast. And then you talk about the maneuverability. And that's the one I think is the hardest to discern from previous ICBMs that have that ballistic track. And there's two things that go along with that. One of them is, how do you detect and sense this, number one, because of the speed and the angle of entry and the glide body itself. And then the second is, what means do we have to counter that? And I would actually dive in, take that apart a little bit and say, what are the kinetic means? And then what are the non-kinetic means? And so traditionally, from a ballistic missile defense perspective, we look at left of launch, meaning what are our capabilities to take this out before it even launches? The second is kind of that boost phase, where how do we take it out before it launches exothermic and separates, which with the warhead, et cetera. And then where do we intercept it?
Kevin,
and so right now, I think...
Sorry, Kevin, just in the interest of time, I think the big question I've got is that everything you're talking about suggests a counter-space capability. Is that what the Americans are working on with their $1 trillion 2026 defense budget?
Yeah, so I think there's initiatives that have come out through the Missile Defense Agency talking about a space-based interceptor. And really the premise behind that is the engagement timeline for the operator to detect, track, and then engage has diminished tremendously in time. And it's really, it's almost like you're going to need an autonomous system to make the decision, which I don't think anybody is ready for that yet. And so one of the concerns and one of the thoughts is, well, if you have a space-based interceptor, you decrease that engagement time and you give it a little bit more legs to go after a target when it's at mid-course.
Kevin, we'll have to leave you there. Thank you very much for that. Mikey, Frank, thank you also for your thoughts. If you want to read about this issue, you can go to Frank's piece online. It's an in-depth article, lots of detail in there. And of course, if you missed any part of this security brief, you can find it on YouTube, on the BBC YouTube website. We'll see you next time.